we have all our witnesses? 1, 2, 3, 4. The committee will come to order again. I thank the witnesses for their indulgence of our recess for the votes on the floor. Hopefully we'll be able to conclude the hearing before there are more votes on the floor. And with that, I'll recognize the gentleman from Texas, Mr. Gohmert, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do appreciate the witnesses. I know everybody's motivation here is out of an intention to preserve America that we hold dear. Civil rights are so critical, and I appreciate the protection of those. We've had some problems with that in recent years. But when it comes to those who are part of a group who have declared war onto us or against us, it changes everything. And I keep hearing people talk about, including some of y'all referring to this American tradition of due process. And my friend from Massachusetts had indicated, you know, you could bring these guys into supermax prisons here in the United States, and we wouldn't have to worry about them escaping. And I think he's right about that. But there are other problems too. These guys are good at recruiting terrorists. And when you have a potential virus that can kill the body, you shouldn't voluntarily bring that virus into the body so you can determine whether or not it may be lethal. That's not the way to do it. If you can examine it outside the body, that's the way to go. And so when and I heard witnesses say we've had commissions with mixed results. Well, Obama stopped commissions that were ongoing in the middle of the trial. You talk about tough on somebody. Talk to those families of victims who were hoping they would get closure, and this president stopped those in the middle of them. And I would readily admit, I believe that when President Bush created his own commissions without coming through Congress, that it was, as the Supreme Court later said, that was not proper constitutionally. So it came through this body, and we had the commission set up, and that was a more appropriate way to do it. And then as Chief Justice Roberts pointed out in his dissent in the Boumediene case, you know, the Supreme Court didn't take yes for an answer. They told us what we had to do. We did it. And then they didn't take yes for the answer. And that's why Justice Scalia said, you're trying to create criminal justice requirements for due process on the battlefield. This is going to cost American lives. I couldn't believe Scalia had the nerve to say that. I like the guy so much, but he's right. You can't require our people in harm's way to go out and have people shooting at them and think, uh-oh, I better go get the forensic kit and do DNA testing and look for hair, look for fingerprints, look for casings. You're fighting a war. The American traditions are due process when people have declared war against us. And let me just read you. This is Khalid Sheikh Mohammed. You want to talk about interpreters? He didn't need one. This guy is smart, and he's well-versed in the Quran, and I'm sure I would hope that you've read this. He filed it on behalf of himself and the 4 other defendants, but some of his quotes were, in God's book, he ordered us to fight you everywhere we find you, even if you were inside the holiest of holy cities, the mosque in Mecca, the holy city of Mecca, and even during sacred months. In God's book, verse 9, Al-Tawbah, then fight and slay the pagans wherever you find them and seize them and besiege them and lie in wait for them in each and every ambush. He goes on, he says, so our religion is a religion of fear and terror to the enemies of God, the Jews, the Christians, pagans. With God willing, we are terrorists to the bone. So many thanks to God. He says we will make all of our materials available to defend and deter and egress you and the filthy Jews from our country. He says also, we fight you and destroy you and terrorize you. The jihad in God's cause is a great duty in our religion. We have news for you. The news is you will be greatly defeated in Afghanistan and Iraq, and that America will fall politically, militarily, and economically. Your end is very near, and your fall will be just as the fall of the towers on the blessed 9/11 day. We will leave this imprisonment with our noses raised high in dignity. These are people who have declared war on us. That is a different standard. And I know a little about military justice, too, having been 4 years involved in it. I know a little about Article 32, General Court Martial. I've appealed capital murder convictions. I've been a prosecutor, a judge, a chief justice. So I know a little bit about this stuff, but when you're talking about people who have declared war against our way of life, that American tradition of due process is different. And 5 minutes is just not much time to do anything, but let me read you, going back to the very start of the American tradition of due process. George Washington, when he was fighting the Revolution for liberty, he said, as the season is now fast approaching, when every man must expect to be drawn into the field of action, it is highly necessary that we should be preparing our minds as well as everything necessary for it. It is a noble cause we're engaged in. It is the cause of virtue in mankind. Every temporal advantage and comfort to us and our posterity depends on the vigor of our exertions. But it may not be amiss for the troops to know that if any man in action should presume to skulk, hide himself, or retreat from the enemy without the orders of his commanding officer, he will be instantly shot down as an example of cowardice. Even if he were going to the latrine or something, they weren't going to have a trial. They were going to shoot him because liberty was at risk. And when your liberty is at risk, we have the constitutional duty to provide for the common defense. And I'm afraid history will judge us harshly someday, as it has all great civilizations that fail, by saying they lost the stomach to defend their liberty. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Does the gentleman have a question for any of the witnesses? I'll indulge him with the extra time.
I do appreciate that. I would like to ask, do any of you feel that the trials of Nuremberg also violated the American tradition?
No, but they were, sir, they were obviously distinct because they were created by treaty among the Allied powers. They were presided over by judges who were trained in the law, and even though they had, excuse me, allowed for hearsay, their opinions had to be carefully explained, and they were in a much better position to evaluate the use of hearsay than would, say, a commission's panel. The other thing I wanted to say is...
So were they not part of the American tradition?
They were part of the international tradition. But the other thing I did want to say is...
You realize how many things were violated, y'all have talked about, or violated with what's being done now, right? You're obviously familiar with the trials at Nuremberg.
Yes, of course.
And you understand they didn't provide a lot of the rights that you're saying are absolutely part of our American tradition of due process, right?
They did not accept coerced statements. They did provide counsel and all resources necessary for defense counsel. They did, and curiously...
Are you aware of all the things they didn't provide, though?
The system was not, there certainly are no, to my memory, there's nothing that was not provided in Nuremberg that I think would now be characterized, or then be characterized as indispensably to civilized nations, as an indispensable part of a justice system. And the comment about Nuremberg that's relevant to the military commission's trial is the one made by General Hartman, Thomas Hartman, the discredited former legal counsel to the convening authority, who said to the prosecutors, these military commissions on Guantanamo will not be like Nuremberg. There will be no acquittals. You cannot set up a system to guarantee conviction.
Thank you. The time of the gentleman has expired. The gentleman from Georgia is recognized for 5 minutes.